All right. Well, I have 101 on my side of things. So I'm going to go ahead and get going. We'll give everyone just a few more minutes as I have just a few starting slides to introduce everything today. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Navigating Your Food Business, a success series. And today's topic, we're going to be focusing on food labeling. We do have a few more webinars coming up over the next couple weeks. We are in the tail end of our success series, but two great webinars coming up. I'm very glad to be able to welcome Ellen Shoemaker next week on June 10th. She's from the Safe Plates program here at NC State Extension, and she'll be talking about some resources and insight for retail foods, restaurants, food trucks, and some market opportunities there. And of course, you'll hear about the Safe Plates program. And then on June 17th, we'll hear from Lynette Johnston talking about some third-party audit certifications, what to expect when you're trying to get into those, what we call big box retailers, the Costco, the Walmart, Whole Foods, Food Lion. So many of these marketing avenues are going to require these third-party audits to get you ready. So we'll have some insight there for you. And then finally, these webinars are going to be hosted still from that 1 to 2 p.m. time slot. And then from 6 to 7, I do believe that I know tonight and I believe on at least the 17th, we will have those sessions live. And then for our in-person series, we are hosting some in-person events coming up in both June and July, where we have a food safety implementation guide that we have created that's getting to the point of what you need to do to optimize or create robust food safety systems for a company. And at this event, yes, we're going to provide that food safety implementation guide, but also you'll have the ability to network within your realm of other food safety professionals and entrepreneurs. So on June 11th, we are partnering with the Cape Fear Community College Small Business Center. So you'll hear from them about the services that they offer to that Southeast North Carolina community. And then we are currently still talking to our partners in Western North Carolina and the Triad region for events in July. And finally, this whole success series is part of a grant venture that we are doing. So you do have our statement down at the bottom. This is a USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture grant. So we do have our funding disclosure there for you. So a few logistics. Thank you. I'm looking over at our participant roster, and we appreciate you keeping that microphone muted while I'm presenting today. I'll have some time throughout the session if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask questions, that'll be available to you. But otherwise, we ask that if you'll please hold on until the end of the session to unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and ask any questions you have. And like usual, if you have been a participant in the past, you'll get an email from me tomorrow with insight into the webinar, as well as the resources that I provide today. All right, and here we go. I'll be your presenter today, so we'll be together for the next, about 50 minutes or so. My name is Kate Nicholas. I am a food safety extension associate here in the Food Bioprocessing and Nutrition Science Department at NC State. While I am located in Raleigh, my role serves all 100 counties. So if you are out by the ocean, out in the mountains, the program that I work with is here to serve you no matter where you are in the state. You have my email. And I do want to introduce this food safety repository. It is a great website that we are developing in conjunction with this grant project. And it is hosting not only a lot of insight and information that we get as food safety professionals, but at the end of the webinar series, you will find summaries from all of our presenters hosting all of that important information that we learned over these past weeks. All right, so today's topics, what are we getting into? Of course, labeling. So we're going to look at a lot of label requirements. So we'll look at label requirements for fresh produce for farms who might be retailing at a farmer's market. We'll look at the principal display panel, which is what we see when we go to the grocery store, that forward-facing display for the consumer. And then we'll talk about some label requirements for bulk products. Of course, we'll talk about allergen labeling. It is so important to get that allergen labeling accurate, to truly disclose what is in your product to consumers. Such an important topic for public health. And then we'll wrap up today with information on best by and use by dates. So before we get going, I have to outline just some quick definitions that are out there. Because while a lot of times these terms that you see on the screen are used interchangeably, they truly mean different things when we're talking about food packaging and marketing of your food product. So a label is probably what you think it is. It's that text or images that are directly on the product or its packaging. Things like that principal display panel, maybe if you're doing a bag in box type of product where, I think of maybe something like Cheez-Its, where they're in that plastic bag, but we're putting the bag into a cardboard box. So the label is on that box packaging. And then, of course, bulk labels also, because we'll quickly see that bulk labels are not going to differ that much from a retail label. We have to communicate the same information. But when we think about when we think about labels in a regulatory sense, that definition does get expanded. And that is where labeling comes into play. So labeling does include the label, but under that broader umbrella, it's also any printed or written material that comes along with the product, as well as your marketing information. So what are you marketing on your website, on your Facebook page, on your Instagram? All of that information is still subject to be accurate to your food product and it being truly a food. And why I bring this up is because unfortunately, sometimes we see that while the label might market a product as a food, the labeling or other methods of communication about the use of that food might span into something like a dietary supplement, or even sometimes in a worst case scenario, it can span into the realm of a pharmaceutical drug. One of the examples we commonly see this with, and just one of the examples is something like an elderberry syrup. So, as a food product, that elderberry syrup needs to be like the pancake syrup that you put over pancakes or waffles. On the other side, sometimes we'll see a product like that fall into the realm of a dietary supplement when there's information included, or even sometimes into the realm of a pharmaceutical drug where it's saying that it'll prevent illness, it'll cure an illness. So that marketing and labeling aspect can truly fall outside of the realm of food products. And today we truly are going to be focusing on food and the labels that we have on our products. All right, so let's dive into our first category. And this is going to be our fresh produce. So I do want to put out there that there are some tiers for fresh produce and farms, and this information comes from our produce safety rule. So what these label requirements are for farms that are making at least $34,324 annually. If you are making less than that, you are not a covered farm. So it does not apply to you as a very small business. But most of the farms that are out there, we're making that much money. So when we go to the farmer's market, when we are selling our product to a food hub, what do we have to include for our consumers? So we have to include the commodity name. So the product and what type of product is it? If we're selling apples, is it a Golden Delicious? Is it a Gala? Is it a Pink Lady? And that goes across the board for your product. So giving that specific commodity name for your consumer. And then we'll need the name of the farm and the location of the farm that that produce was grown. So three simple things to include. If you find yourself at a farmer's market where you have a stand and product out, kind of like this image you see below, you can have placards out. So don't think that you have to put your produce into bags and label those bags. We can have other means of communication for this, but it's giving the customer insight into your product and where that product was grown. All right, so that's our produce information. I do have another quick set of definitions because we're going to be talking a lot about label requirements for self-service food items. And this might be a new definition for some people. So a self-service item is something like what you get at the grocery store. A customer can go to a shelf, they can select that product from a shelf or a display or even an online store and purchase it through a checkout. This means that the customer may not have any communication with the producer. So we have the label there that is going to be providing all of this important, not only commodity information and value communication, but also ingredient. Now, on the flip side, some companies will also have a full service retail model. In these, I think of maybe something like a bakery that's at a market and they have a beautiful display out of all of their breads, their pastries, their cookies. And a customer is going to interact with an employee to select the products that they want. So the products are on display, an employee puts them into a container and hands it to the customer as that transaction. Now, for these items, I want to say that they do not have to have full, complete labels. It's always an additional layer of protection, not only for the company, but also the consumer to include labeling information if you're able to. But what we need at a bare minimum is for the employee who is handling that product and interacting with the customer, for them to have accurate information about all ingredients and all allergens in the food. So a little later, we're going to see those 9 mandatory allergens that we have to label. But I just want to point out that while those 9 allergens do represent the majority of ingredients that cause allergic reactions, people do have sensitivities and allergies to other products. So for that, employees do need to have a complete list of ingredients available to answer those questions if consumers have them. Okay, so this is kind of just an entry slide. We're going to dive into these 4 bullet points as we get further into our discussion. And this is a minimum of what is required. And this is going to be for our small businesses that are not making any type of health or nutrient claim on their products. So we're going to start off with that product name and statement of identity, the net contents. So how much is the customer going to be receiving? And you see that these are kind of separated from our bottom two items because our requirement number 1 and 2, they must be on the principal display panel. Items 3 and 4 can be on a secondary panel, either on the side or the back of the product, depending on your packaging. But 1 and 2 must be on that customer-facing display. Requirement number 3 is the manufacturer or distributor's name and physical address, as well as a complete list of ingredients. That's going to be listed in descending order of predominance by weight. It means the heaviest ingredient is first and the lightest ingredient is last. And that list must also include the common name of any allergens that that product requires. So let's dive a little deeper and look at some examples of this. All right. So number 1, a product name or statement of identity. So I found this bag of Lifesavers in our office, so it's going to be our example today. So in our example, we see that this is a mint product and it's a wintergreen flavor. Now, what you name your product should be a common name so that consumers understand what they're purchasing, especially if there's no statement of identity that exists. We'll get into more of that in just a second. And I understand that naming your products is a balance between your branding and communication with the customer. So I give the example of maybe a product name that could use some improvement. So if I was a bakery and I had a product that was called Kate's Galaxy Explosions. Oh my goodness. Well, I've never seen a galaxy explosion before, and I don't even know what that product would be. And neither will your customer. So we're talking about the ease of communication with them. So a better example, rather than Kate's Galaxy Explosion, would be Kate's Galaxy Brownie Bites topped with blank flavored Pop Rocks. Maybe a little out there. I don't know how many people would buy that. It may be a little bit of an extreme of an example, but make sure that what you're calling your product, a customer's going to understand what they're buying. We don't want them to have to, search through the internet and things like that just to understand what you're selling. Now, for some of our products, we could see a statement of identity that exists. So this is outlined for numerous products in the Code of Federal Regulations. And you see these kind of steps that you can take to find this information that you now see highlighted on the right side of your screen. So for many of our food products, and I like to give the example of cheeses and frozen desserts, there are particular processing requirements or product components that must be aligned to call your product that name. So for the example of frozen desserts, so frozen desserts in North Carolina encompass both dairy and non-dairy ingredients. So if you have a non-dairy frozen dessert, say you're making a frozen dessert and you're using coconut milk and cream of coconut to make that product. Because that product does not have any dairy in it, you cannot call it an ice cream. So being sure that you are aligning not only in customer communication, but also truth in your statement of identity is very, very important there. And you can take a look at all of these various parts that you see over here. And I would take, maybe just a quick note if you make any of these products to investigate this on the Code of Federal Regulations, just to be sure that your labeling and your marketing is aligning with that true statement of identity. All right, up next. So we have our net content. So down at the bottom right corner of our lifesavers, we have this circled in red for you. But net contents need to be listed in US customary systems, so ounces, pounds, fluid ounces, as well as metrics, so grams, kilograms, liters, whatever that measurement is appropriate for the format of your product. Now, we can also go what I think to be maybe a little bit more simplistic, especially for some of our products. And you can also have your net contents in a unit format. So 4 rolls or, 3 apples, something like that. And I do want to introduce something new right now. So we are going to have some information on formatting requirements for your label because there needs to be a little bit of standardization. Customers, they need to know where to look for this information on your product. So that net quantity statement needs to be in the bottom 30% of your principal display panel. And this Savers is a great example of that. And finally, our net content statement cannot have any qualifying phrases, such like you see down here of 4 large ounces or 5 sliced apples. So the format of the food will not come into play for net contents, just the quantity that a consumer is receiving. And this is so important to get accurate because this communicates to the consumer what that monetary to product exchange is going to be. So I'm paying you $5. What am I getting in return for that $5? And this is something that is also just a little outside of the realm of food safety, but it falls more into kind of a legal agreement with your consumer. So being sure that as you're packaging your food, the right label for that quantity is being fulfilled. We don't want for, this example of the Lifesavers, it's 6.25 ounces. We need to be sure we are hitting at minimum 6.25 ounces for every single package that we are making. Any type of underfill can come with some sort of, I'll say, repercussions in a legal sense. A consumer can file a complaint with the state attorneys general if a product is underfilled, and then that state attorneys general will follow up on that for them. So very important to get this information correct. All right, so these are the 2 things, remember, that need to be on that front principal display panel. Now we're going to move into information that it can go on the front principal display panel, but it doesn't necessarily have to. So here we go. Label requirements for the manufacturer or distributor's name and physical address. So in our example, I kind of blown up the back of the label because the font's a little bit smaller. You might be looking at that zoomed in box and say, oh, hey, Kate, this doesn't have the address on here. It just has the town and the state and the zip code. And that's totally fine. When this rule was written, it was back when people were still getting those big old bulky phone books and yellow pages distributed to their front door, kind of pre-internet time. And what this information is truly there for is to communicate how a consumer can get in touch with you if they ever have question or concern about the product that they purchased. So as technology has advanced and almost all of us have access to the internet and Google and online directories, whether it's the yellowpages.com or even something like a Facebook page. We have really changed the way that people communicate with their customers. So our regulators have added some flexibility in there for us, and Lifesavers is capitalizing on that flexibility. So they're saying that this is distributed by Mars Wrigley Confectionery. So that's who is having the product produced, and they are distributing it out of Hackettstown, New Jersey. So for me, when I look at this, it doesn't mean that the product is made in Hackettstown, New Jersey. It means that if I have any question or concern about this, that's the area or the company, the division of Wrigley and Mars that I'll be reaching out to with my concern. So this is 100% acceptable because if I were to type in the name, city, and zip code into an internet search, whether it's Google or Bing, whatever internet search tool you choose to use, that company's contact information will be available through public search. So if we're thinking about Google, a lot of times you'll have all of those internet search results in the left-hand column, and then smaller in the right-hand column, you'll see that company's information, and maybe there'll be a phone number or a website or an email even that you can reach out to. That's what's going to be required. All right. Now for our fourth requirement, this complete list of ingredients in descending order of predominance. Our example for these lifesavers is quite simplistic. They have 4 ingredients here, so a very easy way to list these ingredients. And this product does not contain any allergens, but if it did, we would need to include those as well. Now, I also understand that a lot of our products are not going to be as simple as this list that's here. So that's what the second bullet point you're seeing here on this screen is depicting, is that if you have a multi-component ingredient that you use, I'll say maybe ketchup, for example, if you're making a barbecue sauce. That ketchup as an ingredient has sub-ingredients itself. So it is your responsibility when you're drafting your food label to include all of those sub-ingredients in parentheses directly after that multi-component ingredient. So it'll say ketchup, parentheses, and then you'll list all of the ingredients that are in the ketchup product that you utilized. All right, so those are our 4 main things. We're going to go into some more detail in just a second. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat so far. Oh, thank you so much, Lynette, for answering that question about the produce. I really appreciate it. All right. So this is for our retail self-service items. Now, some of us, depending on our business model, we might be selling our product in bulk. If you manage a retail store, you may have bulk containers with ingredients or products available for sale, and they have labeling requirements too. So, to put it very simply, bulk products need the same labeling requirements as retail packaged foods. So whether you have a market with bulk ingredients like you see in the top picture, where a consumer come in and measure a certain amount into a package and take that to a scale to purchase. Or maybe you are, let's say you're a flour mill and you're producing these 50-pound bags of flour that are going out to local bakeries. We need the same label information on these bulk products because it's not there to be a hassle, but it's there for consumer communication and public health. So all entities, whether it's, direct to consumer or maybe a downstream business that's using your product as an ingredient in their products, they need to know this basic data for food safety, especially when we start thinking about things like traceability and being able to track where your ingredients came from, who manufactured them, and of course, what components are in them. So one of those labeling requirements was allergens. And I just want to take a second here because for decades, allergens have been the number one recall reason in the United States for packaged food products. Now, maybe that's a risk of some sort of cross contact or contamination of that product, or maybe it's an inaccurate label that was put on. Maybe we didn't update our ingredient list after a formulation change, or maybe the wrong product went into the wrong packaging. There's multitudes of ways that this could happen, but recalls can be so impactful for companies, and if not handled appropriately, can cause a large amount of public harm for our consumers. Because a lot of these allergens, a consumer is not going to know right off the bat if that allergen is in the food product or not. So because we know it's such a big public health risk, the FDA has outlined at least 9 foods that we must allergen label for. Last year, we did see our newest one of sesame come onto this wheel. So it used to be the top 8. Now we're the 9 major food ingredients that are allergens. And you can see here on this wheel all of the various products that do need to have allergen labeling. And like I hinted at earlier, just because we're required to label these 9, it does not mean that people cannot have allergic reactions to other ingredients out there. So that's why labeling as a whole is so important for that accurate communication. So when we're here, let's talk about how these need to go onto a food label. We need to call these allergens by their common name so that we're having that clear communication with our consumer. So some of these categories are so broad and so diverse that we are required to further call out the ingredient. And that's what you see down at the bottom left of your screen with the green and red thumbs up, thumbs down. So tree nuts, crustacean shellfish, and finfish all must be speciated. Basically, you have to tell your consumer exactly what type of ingredient in that category you're using. So we shouldn't see tree nuts on a label. We should call it out by the specific name of almonds. Crustaceans, we need to dive deeper and call them shrimp. And fish, a lot of fish out there, hundreds and thousands of fish that are eaten around the world. So fish need to be called out too. So the example of tilapia there. All right, so what are they going to look like on your food label? Now, there's two different ways that you can communicate the common name of these allergens to your consumer. So on the top side in our blue chip bags, so we're making some potato chips and we're dusting some seasoning on top of those potato chips. Our spice blend contains sesame and wheat. And in the top, we are calling it out in parentheses immediately after that allergen containing ingredient. So in another example, we might see something like cheddar cheese, and then we'll list out any components of that cheddar cheese and have in parentheses after it milk. Not the only way that you can communicate. If you don't want to have these allergens kind of interspersed within your ingredient list, you can do a contains statement at the bottom of the ingredient list. Now, it needs to be immediately below the ingredient list. There cannot be any intervening information. So, a photo or, a statement in between these two declarations needs to be immediately beneath it. But we'll say contains, and then you will list out the common name of any of the ingredients, or sorry, any of the allergens that your product includes. What way you choose to format your labels is 100% up to you and your company. I've been seeing companies more and more that will choose to do both. So they will list the ingredient within the ingredient list, but they'll also include that allergen in the contains statement below. If you choose to do this, just be forewarned that if you change any of those raw materials and ingredients that you're using that contain allergens, you'll need to edit the label in both locations. So just an extra checkpoint, we'll say, in label management for you. Now, with allergen labeling, something that we commonly see is precautionary allergen labeling. And I want to take a few moments to talk through this because we're seeing more and more of these. So, before I go any further, this is not a regulatory requirement. It is 100% a voluntary statement that you can put on a label to either further communicate qualities of your ingredients, qualities of your processing facility, or provide insight into how that product was processed and handled. So, we do have some examples here. May contain processed in a facility that also processes or processed on shared equipment. Now, if you are choosing to add these voluntary statements to your labels, number one, they must be accurate. You can add them in, but they need to be just as specific as your main allergen label. So it can't say, actually the top image is a good example of this, may contain other tree nuts. Well, tree nuts is not an accurate label for a ingredient statement. So we need to be more specific on this voluntary statement and say that it may contain peanuts and disclose the other nuts that it may contain. And let's see, so down below we have this product was processed on shared equipment that also processes peanuts, tree nuts. It outlines exactly the tree nuts that it's expecting and eggs. Oh, I am going to have to update these photos because we recently had coconut that came off the mandatory allergen list. So I need to remind myself to update these. And then finally, about these voluntary statements. I mentioned that they're not a regulatory requirement, and it is not anything that is going to be substantiated in a court of law. So there's no legal protection for you as a company if you add these to your label. It is 100% customer communication about the potential environment or way that this food was processed. Now, my last statement, which if you're taking one thing away from this should really be it, is that voluntary precautionary labeling is never a substitute for proper GMP practices, good manufacturing practices for foods, and is never a substitute for pushing sanitation procedures aside. We cannot maybe have some allergen cross contact and say, oh, we don't have to worry about it. I have a voluntary precautionary labeling statement. That product is an adulterated product, and this precautionary labeling will not hold any weight for the company. So never, ever, ever a substitute for sanitation procedures. All right. Oh, I see a question. What precautionary labeling would you use if you're using a shared kitchen and don't know what everyone else is making? Oh, great question, Jennifer. I would put in the most simplistic terms that if you want to use a precautionary allergen label, that this is processed in a public shared kitchen facility. Um, th that's where I would begin. I also think that if you are in a shared kitchen and you would like to add a precautionary label, I think reaching out to the compliance department at the North Carolina Department of Agriculture is a great route to go to see what their current thoughts are on that precautionary labeling. I'm not sure how much they can communicate with you about that because it is not a regulatory requirement. But I would stick along the lines with something that the product was produced in a facility, in a public shared kitchen facility. Because you're right, you're not going to know all the allergens and ingredients that other people are using. Um, and going back to good sanitation practices, this is a great moment just to take a little bit of a side note for some GMP insights and say, if you're working in a shared kitchen facility, the very first thing that you should do when you take over your kitchen for your assigned shift there, you should be having cleaning and sanitizing procedures on the surfaces, tools, and equipment that you're going to be using. Do not rely on the person who came behind you to do an adequate and thorough job for sanitizing and cleaning, especially cleaning. That's how we get rid of allergens. Be sure that you're doing that cleaning and sanitizing step as soon as you get there before you start handling any of your food products. All right. Yes, Jennifer, I think that statement will be great. Thanks. All right, so another thing about all of these allergens is that when we work with companies, we say, we understand that sometimes the ingredients that you're using are unique to your food product, and you have to have them to make your food product your food product. However, we always say also that simplifying your formulation to remove allergens that are unnecessary is kind of setting you up for success. So let's talk a little bit about product formulation. And I have a few examples here that I want to bring forward because some of these might have some unique allergens that you may not expect. So we have some soy sauce, we have some barbecue sauce, and we have some milk chocolate macadamia cookies. So, Let's see, let's put it in chat. So if you have the ability to, what unique allergen do you think you could find in this soy sauce product? Yeah, Suzanne, real quick there. So yes, a lot of our soy sauces have wheat in them. Thank you so much. And this is one of the let's say nature of the beast of producing soy sauce. So many of the formulations traditionally have that wheat allergen in them. Now, in our modern day of food technology and product formulation, you can go out and you can get wheat-free versions of the soy sauce. So just keep that in the back of your mind that if you find an allergen in your product, and that might be an opportunity for you to do a deep dive into product formulation and see, do they make an allergen-free version of that product? One way to simplify your allergen profile and also simplify your ingredient list. All right, let's see. So this original barbecue sauce, what allergen do you think might be a hidden allergen in there? Any ideas? I'll say that it is a sub-ingredient of an ingredient that's used. All right, well, let's take a quick look at it. It's actually anchovies. So we see a lot of times in a lot of these sauces, especially these savory sauces, will have anchovies there. It serves a umami or a sense of savoriness, and even, with anchovies, usually a little bit of saltiness too. The other kind of ingredient that is used a lot in these products is Worcestershire sauce. And Worcestershire sauce has anchovies in it traditionally. They too have an anchovy or a seafood-free version of that as well. I believe the last time I've talked to people about that, I believe Walmart has a anchovy or fish-free Worcestershire sauce that you can use. All right. And then finally, as we talk about product formulation, I just want to give y'all a little bit of a heads up, especially if you or any of your loved ones have food allergies. One of the trends that we are seeing in product formulation is kind of a formulation alignment. So with this milk chocolate macadamia nut cookie, I would expect as a consumer that it would only have macadamia nuts or the nut ingredients. However, what Pepperidge Farm has done is they have created a tree nut meal that includes the almonds, cashews, pecans, and walnuts. So all the nuts that are handled at this facility, they've created a tree nut meal. And that tree nut meal goes into every single product that they make on that. I'm not going to say at the facility, but probably on that production line. So it allows for these products to have very similar, if not identical, allergen formulations. So something to look into, especially around nuts and bakery items, is this kind of pooling of allergens to align that product formulation. And I want to spread this information for people who might have allergen sensitivities. Pick this up. They say, oh, I'm allergic to walnuts. These macadamia nut cookies will be fine for me. Well, if you don't check the ingredient list on every single product you're buying, you might find something like this tree nut meal in it. And this is the intentional addition of the allergens to formulate some cohesiveness across their product lines. All right. So, in our last few minutes, what else do we have some information on? Well, label formatting and sizing. So, at the very end, when we get to our Q&A, I have a QR code for the FDA's Food Labeling Guide. It is such a wonderful resource. I thought I might have mine here at my desk. It's on my bookshelf. It is a wonderful resource. I have it downloaded. I constantly reference this to make sure that not only what I'm suggesting for labels is accurate, but there's formatting and sizing requirements too. So this is some general information about basic products and I'll say quote unquote normal package sizes. So for all of these labels, we need to use a print that's prominent and easy to read. I suggest running through your label through a ADA reader to make sure that it is ADA compliant for the color and the text that you are trying to use. And the letters on the principal display panel need to be at least 1/16 inch in height. And that is based on the lowercase o. Now, this seems a little bit crazy to do, but what I suggest doing is getting a clear ruler and using this, print out your labels in the actual size that you'll be doing and see if that lowercase o is truly at least 1/16 inch. This is what your regulators are doing when they do label reviews. If you've ever had a regulator come and do an inspection and they take some of the labels back to the compliance office, those people that are reviewing the reports, they're going to get out a ruler and make sure that your font size is that lowercase o. And even though I do not have it here, that size is accurate for both the principal display panel, it is accurate for your ingredient list, and it is going to be accurate for your name and location as a manufacturer or a distributor. Now, any additional information that you might need on your product, that information panel should be immediately to the right of the principal display panel. And that's as your product is facing the customer. This is so people who need to have easy access, maybe someone has difficulty with their vision, they know where to go to find this information if they need it, and they're not searching all over your packaging to find that information. So that's the image you see up at the top. And then finally, I think I mentioned it when we were talking about allergens and that contains statement, but that intervening material. So in our example down at the bottom, we have this image of the product displayed in between the nutrition facts panel and the ingredient panel. This would be considered intervening. Technically, intervening information is anything that's not a regulatory requirement. So graphics or organic labeling or any marketing that you're putting onto your product that's not a regulatory requirement, we need to be sure that they are located in accurate places on the label. All right, finally, a nutrition facts panel. So, a lot of companies, especially our larger companies, are required to have nutrition facts panels. We do have some exceptions that you see outlined here in this blue box. So, small businesses, there is a monetary threshold. So, that definition for small business, there's 3 different ways that you can qualify for being a small business outlined at the very bottom of this slide. So less than $500,000 annually in gross sales, less than 10 full-time employees, or less than 100,000 units sold annually. And that is less than 100,000 units of each type of product. So if you were making vanilla ice cream and chocolate ice cream, you would sell less than 100,000 units of both the vanilla and the chocolate. So up to, you know, 99,999 products of each. Nutrition facts panels also not required for restaurants or foods with no significant nutritional value. An example that I like to use for this are spices, as well as coffee beans are surprisingly in that category. Nutrition facts panels aren't needed for bulk foods that are going to go for further processing or foods that are sold in a multi-unit package that have the label, "This unit is not labeled for retail sale" on it. Now, that is on the packaged food itself. You might have seen, if you've gone to the grocery store, Costco, or Sam's Club, and you get that big multi-pack of chips, you might see on the outside that each of those chips is outlined on the major retail box that you pick up from the shelf, but the nutrition facts is not going to be on every small bag of chips that's in that box. All right, then we see raw agricultural commodities, so our fruits and vegetables that are, excuse me, typically sold, at a farmer's market or in a produce section. And then fresh seafood and fresh meat and poultry do not have to have this nutrition facts panel. If you're looking for more information, that food labeling guide that you'll have the QR code for in just a few moments, there is a wealth of information there. And the FDA has some great resources that I'll include in my follow-up email on the exemptions for small businesses. Okay, our last topic is date labeling. Now, date labels are also another voluntary item that you can put on your product. It's another way that you can communicate with your customer. So, applied at the company's discretion. The only exception for this is infant formula. It must have a use by date. It's a sensitive product being consumed by our most sensitive of consumer. Those little ones, we need to have that use by date on that product. So I wanted just to quickly point out that date labels are there, I'll say 9 times out of 10, to outline the highest quality and flavor that a company expects that food to hold. It's not necessarily for food safety. And I bring this up to give more insight into date labels, but also to show the counter side of food waste. So on the left-hand side of your screen, whether you want to look at it in the billions of dollars that are wasted in food, or the billions of pounds of food waste that we have annually, there is a line between the quality of a food and when food safety lines are drawn. So I like to say that it is a balance. And when you are using something like a date label, best if used by is truly the most accurate way to describe a quality standard that you are expecting your food to hold. But it's not just the only type of information that we have for date labels. There's so much information that you can usually see printed on products. So we see use by, we see sell by dates. I'll have some definitions for you in just a moment that outline these. And it's not just consumer information, it's also information about when and where that product was made. So, for example, on the very top, this egg carton. So we see that 125 space P1978. So that one, and there's no rhyme or reason to these codes that companies apply. It is an internal communication about that product. But if I had to guess, I would say that that 125 is a Julian date. So it was made on the 125th day of the year. And then the P 1978 is probably associated with the plant and the line that this product was made on. And why it's important for our big companies to use this information is if you as a consumer have any issue with this product, if you provide that information in your complaint, it allows the company to pinpoint exactly when and where that product was made. The other one I wanted to point out is on the bottom right-hand side, the manufacturer and expiration date. Now, this is on a canned good, and canned goods, we know that they can be pushed to the back of a pantry. They can go in emergency preparedness kits. Canned foods have extremely long shelf lives. So this company is opting to give you more insight into both when it was manufactured as well as when they expect it to expire. Because while canned foods go through intense thermal treatment for food safety, it is still not a zero risk food. So I mentioned I was going to have some information about what the industry expects these dates to be. And here we go. So we've talked about this best by, best if used by. That's for optimal flavor and quality. A sell by date is there to help track inventory for stores, not a safety date. A use by, that last date before a product is a diminished quality. So we're looking at peak quality there. And again, not a safety date except when used on infant formula. And then finally, a freeze by date, giving your consumer some indication of if they are going to freeze the food, what date should they freeze it by so that throughout its freezing, it can still maintain peak quality. Again, not a purchase or a sell by date. All right. And that's all that I have for you today. We're just after 2 o'clock, so thank you for hanging out with us a little after two. I want to open up the floor and see if anyone has any questions that I can address. All right, let's see. Don't worry about being late, it's fine. All right, product claim is tackled with labeling. Just want to know if we're using a co-manufacturing facility to make our product and they are HACCP or GMP certified, but our company is not. Is it okay to put the claim on the label processed in a facility that is HACCP and or a GMP certified? So that's going to be a marketing statement that you put in. What I would do is if you are going to put anything like that on your label, you need to collect those documents from the facility that is manufacturing your product. And you need to hold on to those documents. You need to receive them annually. And anytime that they go through that certification, because they might be third party audited. I'm not sure of places that do GMP certifications. Just not something that I'm aware of. But if they are going through third party audits, that is something that you can use in your marketing. It might be maybe on your website and not directly on your food product. Just be sure that if you are adding that to your label as maybe a food safety feature of your product, that it is not falling into that category of any type of intervening material. All right. Is there a recording of these presentations that we can access? Elizabeth, I'm going to make a PDF out of my presentation and I'll send that along in the email for you tomorrow. And while we may not have the presentations recorded online, when our Success Series webinars are all finished, we'll be putting summaries, resources, and insight into our food safety repository so that you can still have access to this information, if not the recording itself. Any other questions? Well, if not, if we could, thank you so much, Lynette. You read my mind. We would love to hear your feedback about today's session. Thank you so much for completing this, especially if you are a repeat visitor to our webinars. Your insight is so important to us. It helps us fine tune our programming as we go through our responsibilities to you as stakeholders in North Carolina. So thank you so much for making sure that we're bringing you information that is relevant and timely for your needs. We really appreciate that feedback. And since I'm not seeing anything else on here, let's see. Suzanne, let's see. Required labeling for a loaf of bread that's sold at a farmer's market for a producer. All right, so that $34,000 that we talked about at the beginning, that is for only produce sales. So that bread is not going to be under the produce safety rule. It's going to be under the manufactured foods program. So that loaf of bread will, if it's in a bag and it's for self-service, it'll need those four mandatory items that we talked about. If it is a loaf of bread that is being sold out of a bulk container to a customer by an employee of that bakery, they do not have to have all the labeling, but they do have to have all of the ingredients and the allergens in that product available to communicate that with the customer. You're welcome. Yeah, that self-service versus bulk product can be a little tricky. All right. Well, we hope to see everyone next week for our conversation with Ellen Shoemaker and the Safe Plates program. Thank you so much and hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.